Welcome to the Story Learning Podcast, regular doses of language learning tips and motivation to help you become fluent in any language. With me, Olly Richards. For language programs, books, free resources, and much more, visit StoryLearning.com.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the I Will Teach You a Language podcast. I'm super happy to be back talking to you today. I've been a little bit inconsistent in recent weeks, for very good reasons. I have to say, I've actually had a holiday for the first time in a while. I tend to travel quite a lot for work. I was in Montreal recently for the language festival. I was in Mexico back in June, but these are all kind of work related. I actually had a holiday for the first time since I can remember, and I was in Malaga in the south of Spain, which was amazing. I have to say. I mean, if I'm completely honest, I had a little bit of a stereotype about Malaga. I thought it would be a bit of a British expat haunt, but it was nothing of the sort. I mean, some of the surrounding towns are a bit like that, but Malaga itself was just a beautiful place. One of my favorite Spanish towns by a long stretch. I really was very, very impressed by it, and all of the surrounding areas as well. You have places like Nerja, Frigiliana, Ronda, some stunning places really that you have to look up some of these places if you don't know them, because they're absolutely, well, they're quintessentially Spanish, and it makes you feel like you're in the middle of Don Quixote or something like that. But anyway, I am back and looking forward to getting back to answering your questions. One of the things that I think I've mentioned this before already, but I'm kind of gearing up to do a big survey with you, because I've been doing the podcast now for over 2 years, 2 and a bit years, and you know, here we are, episode 217. We've talked a lot about languages, but I can't help feeling that there are maybe some things that I could be doing differently, a different direction I could take the podcast. I know a lot of you guys like the interviews that I do, which is cool. I like doing the interviews as well, but I don't think I want to just do interviews. So I'm going to be asking you soon to help me out by replying to a survey, telling me both what you like about the podcast, what you don't, and I'm going to be also putting forward some ideas about things that we could do differently, whether it's more interviews, whether it's having some guest hosts on, whether it's about having seasons or particular themes. I'll be asking you all these questions, and I'll be seeking your views and your replies to try and make sure that the podcast stays relevant, stays helpful for you, and so on and so forth. So, let's hear today's question from William.
Bonjour, Olly. Comment ça va? My name is William, and I'm learning French. I have a question to you about comprehension and people that comprehend languages without speaking them. I've been learning French for a meaningful period of time now, but I would say that my comprehension is still only about 60 to 70%, and I can speak at about probably the same level. Now, I live on the border of Quebec, and I work at a store, and I work with many people, and I see this with many people that grew up with French families. Maybe they had a grandmother that spoke to them in French. Maybe they had French around them a lot. They just never learned to speak the language. Now, they can understand French 100% perfectly, yet they cannot speak more than a word or two in French, nothing more than bonjour. So I'm wondering about this phenomenon, and I see this a lot with people that maybe immigrate to the United States or Canada, and they have families that spoke a different language, and they just grew up hearing them, and they can understand them perfectly, yet they can't speak it. Because when I have a customer that talks to me, I can, get the gist of what they're saying. I can understand, like I said, about 60 to 70% of it, and then I can reply at about a 60 to 70%, way of speaking with them. Sorry if that didn't make sense. But my coworkers, for example, by contrast, they can understand everything they say, every detail, 100%, yet they always reply in English. And it seems like it's a really strange thing for me. And I wonder, how do I get my comprehension up to that level of somebody, especially somebody that does not speak the language? Is it something as simple as just listening to more music in French, listening to conversations more, just spending more time just listening and comprehending as opposed to trying to speak? Or should I keep doing what I'm doing, which is try to improve all the aspects of my language, and then that comprehension will improve over time? Again, Thanks for the great podcast. Salut!
Salut William, merci pour votre question. J'étais au Canada en fait le mois dernier et c'était génial, j'ai passé un bon moment. Et j'ai parlé beaucoup français aussi, donc je comprends ce que vous dites là. Let's see if we can untangle a little bit this problem, because it's very interesting what you're saying. Now, for those that don't know, Canada, the east of Canada especially, Quebec, Montreal, it is mostly a French-speaking area. And when I was in Montreal last month, walking on the street, you hear more French than English. So I understand that Quebec City itself is even more French-speaking than Montreal. So it is very much a kind of francophone area. But of course, English is universally understood, I guess, because of the proximity to the US and all the cultural heritage of the cultural impact of the English-speaking country next door. So as you say, you've got these very interesting mixes of situations, right? So you've got people who grew up predominantly speaking English with little knowledge of French, especially in different parts of the country. You've got people that grow up speaking French as a native language, but also speak English, and then you've got these cases in between, whereby on the one hand you've got your case, William, where you grow up speaking English, but you studied French for a long time and you kind of understand quite a bit. And then on the other hand, you've got these people whose grandparents were maybe French, and they grew up listening to French, but they've only ever spoken English. And I think every case is very unique and very, very complex. And, I'm reminded of friends that I have who are BBC, British-born Chinese, or I guess ABC, you might say in North America, American-born Chinese. So people who are culturally Chinese, but are born into an English-speaking country and grow up speaking English. I've spoken to lots of people in the States as well whose heritage is Hispanic, and yet they've gone through the English-speaking school system and they don't really speak much Spanish. It can be psychologically very complicated, For someone like us, William, who grew up speaking English and yet who have learned another language as a second language or as a foreign language, in a way it's quite simple, because we identify with being English speaking, and then we have this other language which is like an object for us, what we study, and psychologically it's pretty straightforward for us. But for somebody who has family whose grandparents maybe speak another language, and they've grown up hearing this language, it can be quite difficult to know what your feelings are towards this language, because you understand it and you know that it's part of your heritage. But often as a kid, you might rebel against that, because often, it's cool to speak English, and you don't want to, as a kid, you don't want to stand out or appear different. So you kind of suppress that language somewhere in your mind, and you focus instead on speaking English. I mean, that is extremely common. So I think you kind of got to take it in a case-by-case basis. You've mentioned colleagues of yours who have French-speaking grandparents, so they understand everything, but they reply in English. The reason this happens is simply because as they grow up, the people that they want to talk to, their friends, their school system, all of this is in English, and for whatever reason, they either haven't had the opportunity to speak French, maybe they don't see their grandparents that much, or else maybe they feel that French is something that makes them different, which as a teenager maybe they don't like, and so for whatever reason they kind of push French away in terms of speaking it. It's more comfortable for them to reply in English because English is their identity, and so even though they might understand French because they grew up in a French-speaking household, actually they've just gotten so used to replying in English that that's what they do now. It's as simple as that. It's kind of a habit, if you like. But you're asking a slightly different question, because it sounds like you've done a great job. When people come in to where you work and they talk to you in French, you understand 60-70%. And then when you reply to them in French, you feel like you can reply with like 60-70% accuracy, which is fantastic. And many people never get that far. So, first thing to say is good job. I mean, congratulations on getting that far. But you want to take it up a level because that's not enough for you, which I understand completely. And so that your question, as I understand it, is, well, how do I do that? I also think you pretty much answered the question in your own question, which is by saying, like, you just need to do more of the things that obviously work, right? So, I mean, I'm guessing that you have, since you've been studying French for a long time, I'm guessing that you don't spend a huge amount of time actively learning right now. And so really the obvious answer is, well, you just need to get back to that. So if you want to improve your comprehension, then you need to spend more time listening and reading, right? So find podcasts, read books that are on topics of interest and spend a lot of time with them. If you want to improve your speaking, then you need to, either find a teacher or find a language partner, spend more time actually speaking so that you're not just waiting for that person to walk into the store and speak to you in French. You're proactively looking for those opportunities to speak every week, 2 or 3 times a week, with someone who will push you and force you to express yourself. Like, those are the kind of things you have to do. And I think you sound like you really understand that. So I won't belabor that point. It really just comes down to a focus on doing those things. But you also kind of asked the question in a way which was like, well, is it really as simple as that? And let's explore that, because you're at a point where you already speak and understand French really well, right? Which means that you are entering this territory of diminishing returns, which is that the harder you study, the less results you get back, because you've already learnt much of the language. So it's important to understand that progressing beyond this point is the hardest part of all. There is a world of, many people say that, moving from C1 to C2, which is kind of advanced 1 to advanced 2, is almost just as hard. It's almost as much work as getting from 0 to C1 in the first place. Because learning to refine that knowledge and really perfect your vocabulary, your understanding and usage of the language is a really tall order. So it is difficult, the stage that you're moving into. And for that reason, I think you have to approach this task of looking to perfecting your French with the attitude of, okay, I need to surround myself with the best French I can, with the highest quality French that I can. I need to become an educated French speaker. So more than anything else, I think that means reading. Do the kind of things that educated French people would do. So read books, read newspapers, read things that are of interest to you. I'm not sure what your work situation is, but, read things that have to do with your profession. There's an obvious connection there, right? But I think you have to start saying to yourself, I'm going to spend lots of time reading, lots of time listening to very good high-level French. And over time, you will follow the same path that, say, a high school kid takes. Say let's take, for example, a kind of 13, 14-year-old French-speaking kid who, it's his mother tongue, but he doesn't dominate the language yet. Whereas by the time he's 18, 20, 21, he does dominate the language. And the reason is because he's gone through many years of studying French in an academic context. And he's spent lots of time surrounded by really good quality language. And so you've got to kind of take the same path. It's going to be a process of a number of years spent really reading as much as you can. I mean, at the end, really, in the final analysis, it is a lot of reading and becoming an educated person that is going to get you where you want to go. So it is simple, really, but it's not easy. And so I think the big task for you, William, is trying to get that mindset of becoming that educated speaker of French. So I hope that's helpful. Good luck. Let me know how it goes. If you'd like to ask me a question, please go to iwillteachyoualanguage.com/ask, and you can do that. I'd also really like to hear from you if you are someone with a heritage language. Maybe your parents or your grandparents used to speak to you in one language and you've kind of since forgotten that. I'd like to know your feelings about that and how it affects you now, or how it's affected you in the past. If you'd like to talk to us about that, share your thoughts and your experiences, please go to iwillteachyoualanguage.com/episode 217. That's the show notes, episode 217, and leave a comment there for myself and for William, and for everybody else who's interested in this topic. Lots of exciting stuff coming up. I'll talk to you very soon.
Thanks for listening to today's episode, and in case you didn't already know, I teach languages in a rather unusual way through stories. Now, stories are a great way to learn a new language because when you're engrossed in a story, you remember things more easily, and the mechanics of the language just start clicking inside your brain. It's quite something, and if you'd like to find out how you can learn a new language or improve your skills in a language that you already know and do it with the power of stories, then you should check out my free Story Learning Kit, which will teach you exactly how this method works and how you can use it yourself to learn a new language. Visit storylearning.com/podkit, that's PODKIT, to get free access. Inside, you'll find explanatory videos, masterclasses, worksheets, short stories to practice with, and much, much more. Once again, that is storylearning.com/podkit, PODKIT. And if you're lucky, you might also find a link in the podcast description or show notes of this episode.